This is the story of how a few ships changed the fate of entire continents, and how millions of lives were reshaped without ever being asked. Within a few hundred years, small European nations crossed oceans they barely understood, and ended up controlling most of the world. Empires rose, cultures were erased, wealth was extracted, and borders were drawn that still define global conflict today. And the most unsettling part, much of what we see today traces back to these decisions. Before we go deeper, make sure to like and subscribe to The Rational Historian. It didn't start with power, it started with curiosity and desperation. In the 1400s, Europe was not the center of the world. Powerful civilizations already existed, but European kingdoms were hungry. The Ottoman Empire controlled key land routes, so Europe looked to the sea. Portugal was one of the first to act. Prince Henry the Navigator pushed explorers forward. These journeys were slow, dangerous, and deadly. Soon, Portuguese sailors reached India. Then came Spain. In 1492, Columbus sailed west. Instead, he landed in the Americas. That mistake would change history forever. At first, these lands were seen as opportunities, but that quickly changed. These lands were not just rich, they were vulnerable. Diseases like smallpox devastated populations. Entire populations collapsed within decades. And this is where colonization truly begins. Spain moved fast. Conquistadors didn't just explore, they conquered. They overthrew massive empires. Gold and silver flooded back to Europe. But it wasn't just about wealth. It was about power, religion, and domination. Indigenous cultures were suppressed or destroyed. Entire societies were reshaped. And Spain wasn't alone for long. As Spain and Portugal grew powerful, other European nations watched closely and they wanted in. England, France, and the Netherlands began building their own empires, turning exploration into a race for global dominance. In North America, the British established colonies along the East Coast, but their approach was different from the Spanish. Instead of focusing only on extracting wealth, they brought settlers who planned to stay. These settlers didn't just trade, they built towns, farms, and entire societies that mirrored Europe. But this expansion came at a cost, especially for Native American populations. They were pushed off their land, forced into treaties they didn't understand, and often devastated by disease and conflict. What began as small settlements slowly turned into a takeover of an entire continent. France followed a different strategy, focusing more on trade, especially the fur trade, and forming alliances with native tribes. For a time, this gave them an advantage in the region. But in the long run, population size and military strength proved more powerful than alliances. Meanwhile, the Dutch became masters of trade, building powerful companies like the Dutch East India Company. This company acted almost like a government, making deals, waging wars, and controlling territories in Asia. And then there was Africa, which became central to one of the darkest chapters in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. European powers didn't just take resources from Africa, they took people. Millions of Africans were captured, sold, and transported across the Atlantic under brutal conditions. They were forced to work on plantations in the Americas, producing sugar, cotton, and tobacco. These goods made European empires incredibly wealthy, while creating a brutal system of exploitation that lasted for centuries. By the 1700s, European colonization had spread across the Americas, Africa, and parts of Asia. But this wasn't just expansion, it was a system built on control, extraction, and inequality. The effects of that system were not temporary, they were permanent. As European empires grew, so did resistance. Colonization was never peaceful, and it was never fully accepted. Across the world, people fought back. In the Americas, tensions grew between colonies and their European rulers. The British colonies began to question why they were being controlled from across the ocean. This led to the American Revolution, a turning point where a colony broke free and became its own nation. But independence didn't mean the end of colonization. In many ways, it inspired more of it. Europe entered a new phase: industrialization. Factories demanded raw materials on a massive scale. Colonized lands became the perfect source of those resources. This led to aggressive expansion into Africa and Asia during the 1800s, often called the Scramble for Africa. European powers divided Africa among themselves, ignoring the people living there. Borders were drawn without regard for ethnic groups, cultures, or histories. These artificial borders still cause conflict today. In India, the British East India Company slowly took control, first through trade, then through influence, and finally through direct rule. India became one of the most valuable colonies in the British Empire, but at a massive cost to its people. Local industries were destroyed, and resources were heavily extracted. Famines became more deadly under colonial policies. The wealth flowed out of the colony and into Europe. At the same time, cultural impact spread across the world. Languages, religions, and political systems were imposed. In many places, local identities were replaced or heavily altered. But resistance never stopped. From rebellions in India to uprisings in Africa and revolutions in Latin America, people fought to reclaim their land and their future. And eventually, the system began to crack. The 20th century changed everything. 2 world wars weakened European powers, both economically and politically. Colonies saw an opportunity, and they took it. One by one, nations across Asia and Africa began to gain independence. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India and Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana pushed for freedom, sometimes through conflict. By the mid-1900s, the age of empires was ending. But colonization didn't just disappear. Its effects stayed behind. The borders drawn during colonial times still define countries today. Economic inequalities created during that era still exist. Many former colonies continue to struggle with political instability because their systems were designed for control, not independence. Even global trade today reflects colonial patterns. Resources often still flow from former colonies to wealthier nations. And culturally, the impact is everywhere. Languages like English, French, and Spanish are spoken across continents, shaping identity and communication. So when you look at the modern world, you're not just seeing the present, you're seeing the legacy of colonization. A system that started with exploration has turned into domination and left behind a world still trying to understand itself. If this story made you think differently, drop a comment below, because your perspective matters. Share this video with someone who thinks history is boring, and show them how wrong that idea really is. And if you want more stories that connect the past to the world you live in today, stay with The Rational Historian, because history isn't just what happened, it's why everything is the way it is.